Guys, before we jump into this video, I do want to disclose that it is proudly sponsored by Jensen USA. I have a link to the Ibis Mojo HD5 in the YouTube description below, and anything you purchase from Jensen will directly help support my channel. Beyond that, I do have a relationship with Ibis. I did work there for 7 years, and now they continue to sponsor me. They're sponsoring 3 videos on this channel. This is not one of those. And beyond that, I'm riding their bikes in about half of my online videos. Furthermore, I'm supported by Shimano, PNW Components, Industry 9, Cali Protectives, and Kitspo Cycling Apparel. All right, let's jump into the video. I hope you're all doing well. Here in Washington State, we've had a dry and dusty summer, but that's okay because it gives way to tacky and tasty fall, one of the best seasons for mountain biking. I am excited for fall because I had a pretty rough summer. Back in June, on this very bike right here, had a huge wreck, took myself out of commission, but thank goodness, Back in Action PT and Apex Chiropractic took care of me, and I'm back on this bike, hitting the trail once again. How has your summer been going? Have you been riding your bike? Have you rediscovered mountain biking? Have you gotten into mountain biking for the first time? Let me know in the comments down there below this. Last summer, I also had a big crash, and this poor bike behind me hasn't been as visible on the channel as I'd like. Big part of that is because I have been broken. Back in September 2019, I was lucky enough to receive the bike behind me, at least the frame, and it's been through a couple different parts iterations since then. In this video, you'll see shots of it with this Marzocchi Z1. You'll also see shots with a Fox 36 Grip 2 fork up front, and you'll see both the Trust Shout and the Trust Message all attached to this bike. The HD5 is a 153 travel, all mountain enduro bike. It uses a 170 travel fork, weighs about 5.5 pounds without a shock, and it uses 27.5 wheels. Yep, that's right, roller skate wheels.
State of the industry.
29ers are all the rage, then why am I doing a video about a 27.5 wheel bike? Well, it's 2020. With coronavirus here, bars are shut down, sporting events are closed, music festivals are shut down. There's not a whole lot to do besides ride your sweet mountain bike. As a result, everyone's Googling what bike should I buy, and they're reading about all these cool 29ers, which are fantastic bikes, but with all this demand for 29ers, there's been plenty of good 27.5 bikes that are still available. So part of why I'm covering this bike is because it's a really good bike, and it's honestly more available than a lot of 29ers. Bikes are sold out across the board. Even some of the wear parts like chains, tires, brake pads are kind of hard to get at times. If you're trying to get a new bike right now, it's a challenge to find anything available. If you're willing to entertain 27.5 options, you get a lot more to pick from, and some of them are really darn fun. In my opinion, the HD5 is best suited for mountain biking in legit mountains. With the steep seat tube angle and a pretty upright posture, it climbs up something steep pretty darn easily. The head tube has been lengthened 26 millimeters over the previous generation HD, and it's still a taller head tube than the Ripmo AF or even the Ripmo Carbon V2. Despite that extra head tube length, the stack height is still 10 millimeters lower, which is why I have so many spacers under the stem there. I don't want this just to be a whole video about 29 versus 27.5, but one thing I've noticed on this bike is that when climbs are really steep but smooth with good traction, you can stay seated, scoot right up them, everything's great. When traction gets more challenging, when you have little obstacles you need to roll over, roots, rocks, logs, whatever, the 29-inch wheels, you can stay seated for longer. On the 27.5 bike, you're gonna need to stand up and do a little more body English and finessing to get your way up the hill. The upright posture of the HD5 is really helpful for this because it's easy to drop that saddle before you pop right up and do your body English. I'm lucky enough to live here in Bellingham, Washington. I've ridden this bike in Washington State, in British Columbia, and out in Montana. This is one of the lightest bikes in my entire quiver right now. 31.4. So if your trails aren't super steep, if you don't have gravity helping to pull you down, a light bike makes those trails less of a chore. You do have a lot of travel on tap. It's quite progressive, so it's easy to pump through stuff. But yes, it can make an easy trail feel even easier on occasion, so keep that in mind as you're picking out your next bike. As the old saying goes, it's more fun to ride a slow bike fast than a fast bike slow. The HD5 excels at jumpy stuff. It also works well in tight technical trail situations where getting your bike airborne is a good way of providing progress down the trail. This is why I think the HD5 is the ultimate aging BMXer mountain bike. Wait. That could be me. After a few weeks on the Mojo 4, I got back on the HD5 and I felt like I could pop higher off jumps with the bigger bike. I had more cushion on those out of control landings and I had more traction when things got real slippery. Now, once again, the caveat, I'm riding in a place that has really good trails. This is a destination. If you are riding someplace that might not be a mountain biking destination, shall we say, then it's a harder decision, as the Mojo 4 will be a lot of fun to ride on the ragged edge, and if you're not quite pushing a bigger bike to the limit, it might be a little less fun than something shorter travel. Once you're airborne with the HD5, balancing the bike is going to be a little bit more challenging than a big-wheeled 29er. On the flip side, if you need to nose into a tight landing, it's going to be a little bit easier to do on this than on that 29er. I've had 4 big injuries over the last 5 years. When I hop on a new bike, I want to feel confident and predict how it's going to handle. I don't want any surprises. When I go back and forth between my 29-inch wheeled Ripmos and this little guy, the HD5,
not quite as planted and bounces off its line a little bit easier than the Ripmo, for instance.
So that could just be me, still kind of recovering in the back of my head from this big crash back in June. I mention this because if you have a whole fleet of different bikes, it might be smart to keep the same wheel size across it. A quick word on traction tune. So Ibis specs a very, very, very light compression and rebound tune on their stock suspension options. You'll notice I don't have the stock suspension on here. I'm only provided with the carbon parts from Ibis, not the suspension. So I reached out to Fox to get the fork and the shock. I tried the traction tune once with Ibis and with Motion Instruments to get a read on things, and it worked fine. I'm an ex-professional downhill racer, so I'm going pretty quick. Not the fastest guy around by any means, but I'm pushing the bike to its limits. I'm 170 pounds, and I had plenty of room with the stock suspension components to add more damping than I really wanted. So traction tune, it's available if you need to go to it. It just means your lighter range is more available. Now, is traction tune for everyone? Well, if you're lighter weight, say under 150 pounds, it's gonna be awesome for you. For my weight, I'm not using the traction tune recommendations from Ibis. I simply jump too much and ride jumpy trails quite a bit, so I prefer a little bit more damping than what they're recommending. If you're a really heavy rider, then that might be something to think about. Same time, if you're not a pro level rider, then traction tune could easily be something that works to your benefit. From my experience working at Ibis, that's generally their MO, is to go for the best riding solution because that should be what sells the best, and that's it. For the average rider, traction tune is gonna be helpful, but then again, I'm not really the average rider or the intended buyer or something like this. I have not had a whole ton of issues with this bike. The rear axle has come loose on me a few times, so I swapped it out for a Shimano E-through axle. It's just a quick release made by my sponsor, Shimano. It works really well, and then you don't have to get a tool out to remove your rear wheel. I've been riding the HD5 for a year now, and I've got no issues with the bushing design of the lower link. That's worth mentioning. I like how I can carry a spare tube and a derailleur hanger and headset spacers and a multi-tool shift cable all up in my pork chop bag in the front triangle. I can fit a single water bottle in the Arundel cage. Notice that all Ibis bikes are generally designed around that Arundel bottle cage, to the point that I did an entire video about a water bottle cage. Sounds silly, but that was probably the most helpful video I've ever made for a lot of people. Who is this bike for? Well, in my opinion, it's for an aging BMXer. The way that it handles with the small wheels and longer travel, it really likes to get airborne, and it can handle some pretty rough and rowdy terrain with a riding style like that. Is it gonna be the fastest bike in the world? Honestly, probably not. But if you're ultimately worried about speed, I think one of the Ripmos would work better for you than the smaller wheeled bike. This would be a great setup for really rough, gnarly terrain if you have a pretty poppy, playful style. It's pretty darn fun in the bike park as well. I have ridden this guy on Dirt Merchant, A-Line, bunch of other trails, and it handled it all just fine. The HD5 is a great backcountry bike. It's great for someone who's got that aggressive style, who knows how to bunny hop and pop and jump their way down the trail. For me, I'm gonna keep riding my Ripmo AF as my travel bike because I feel like it can work in a wider variety of locations. But if I had to only bring the HD5, it would be fine. I'm kind of picking between children at this point. I think the HD5 has an edge over the Ripmo for the really tight, raw, natural trails where being able to finesse the bike is more important than just smashing through. I know some of you on the internet are gonna ask, what about riding it like a mullet? Well, I tried it. It's not my cup of tea. I noticed that the way the front wheel handled and accelerated was very different than the back half of the bike, and it did not feel balanced to me. I wasn't a fan. When I was going to pump through things, the front and rear ends responded differently, and tracking through corners, it was a little bit awkward for how I like my bikes to handle. That's just me though. If you want to learn more about the Mojo HD5, I've got a link in the YouTube description below over to Jensen USA, one of my best sponsors. Jensen's a great online retailer. They've got a great stock of Ibis bikes like this HD5. I think a lot of you would be really happy with an HD5 as your main all-around trail, all-mountain enduro bike. If you have any more questions for me about my HD5, feel free to drop them below. I also have a full spec of the bike listed out in the description. And in case you're wondering, I might have a comparison video between the Z1 and a Fox 36 coming up at some point soon here, so stay tuned for that. Thank you all for watching. Click that subscribe button below, leave me a comment, and I'll see you on the trails. Peace.